One of the most striking early modern accounts of an unidentified phenomenon in the sky was recorded in 1663 near the northern Russian village of Robozero. The incident unfolded on August 15, the Feast of the Assumption, when villagers had gathered in large numbers at the local church for worship. In a deeply religious society where unusual events were often understood as omens, signs, or divine warnings, the setting itself helps explain the intensity of what followed. Around midday, as the service was underway, a tremendous noise was heard outside. The sound was alarming enough that many of the worshippers rushed from the church to the open square to discover its cause. What they saw, according to later testimony, was something extraordinary. A brilliant, fiery object moving across the sky from the north, described as a glowing sphere or blazing ball of fire roughly 140 feet in diameter. Witnesses said the object was even more unsettling because it did not simply streak past and vanish. From its front extended two fiery rays, giving it a purposeful and almost directional appearance as it passed over the church and drifted toward the nearby lake. Then, less than an hour later, it appeared again. It moved back from the lake toward the western sky, vanished briefly, and then returned once more, hovering over the area for roughly an hour and a half before finally disappearing. This repeated motion gave the event a strange persistence that distinguished it from an ordinary meteor or fleeting flash in the heavens. For the people of Robozero, the phenomenon was not only bright and unusual, it seemed to linger, return, and impose itself on the landscape in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The most dramatic details came from two fishermen who had been out on the lake in a boat when the object appeared above the water. According to the report, they were driven back by the intense heat radiating from it and later showed signs of burns. They also claimed that the lake was illuminated to a depth of about 30 feet, while fish fled toward the shoreline as if escaping the light and heat overhead. Under the reddish glow, the water itself was said to look as though it had been covered in rust. News of the event soon reached a local official, Ivachko Rivskoy, who investigated after hearing the account from a farmer named Levko Fedorov. When clergy in the district confirmed the essential details, Rivskoy sent a written report to the monastery of St. Cyril, where the incident was entered into the record. That official preservation is one reason the Robozero case has remained so memorable. Whether interpreted as a misunderstood natural event, a religious portent, or something still unexplained, it survives as one of the most vivid and carefully recorded anomalous sky sightings in early modern history. In the early hours of September 19, 1976, while Tehran still lay under the quiet darkness before dawn, reports began to reach Iranian authorities of a strange and brilliant object suspended in the sky above the capital. Witnesses described an intense light unlike anything they had seen before, bright enough to command immediate attention. In response, the Iranian Air Force ordered an F-4 Phantom Roman II fighter jet into the night to investigate. At the controls was Lieutenant Yadi Nazari, who soon located the object and moved to intercept it. But as his aircraft closed to engagement range, a disturbing pattern emerged. His instruments failed, his communications equipment went dead, and the aircraft systems appeared to collapse all at once. Only when he broke away from the object did the equipment return to normal, leaving behind a deeply unsettling first encounter. After Nazari returned to base and reported what had happened, Iranian commanders treated the matter with enough seriousness to dispatch a second F-4. This time the pilot was Squadron Commander Major Parviz Jafari, an experienced officer whose testimony would later become central to the case. As he approached the target, Jafari observed an object he described as diamond-shaped and ringed with powerful lights, red, green, orange, and blue, so vivid and dazzling that they obscured the structure itself. By his estimate, the object appeared comparable in size to a Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker. At a distance of roughly 27 miles, his radar locked onto the target, seemingly confirming that this was no ordinary visual illusion. Yet almost immediately, as with the earlier aircraft, his communications equipment failed without warning. What followed transformed the episode from a puzzling aerial sighting into one of the most discussed military encounters of its kind. According to Jafari, a bright spherical object suddenly separated from the larger craft and accelerated directly toward his fighter at extraordinary speed. Interpreting it as a possible threat, he attempted to fire a missile. At that precise moment, however, his weapons control panel failed, rendering the aircraft unable to respond. The sphere passed by, and Jafari, unable to engage and with his systems compromised, turned away. Once again, the electronic failures eased as distance increased. As he withdrew under orders to return to base, he reportedly saw the larger object release another luminous sphere, this time descending toward the ground. It ended in a brilliant flash visible from below, a burst of light that residents in the area later said they too had witnessed during the night. Because Iran at the time was a close ally of the United States, the incident was formally documented and forwarded to the U.S. military, where it entered official channels and was later declassified. Over the decades, the Tehran encounter has remained one of the most frequently cited Cold War-era UFO cases, not only because of the number of witnesses involved, but because trained military pilots reported instrument disruptions, radar confirmation, and apparent object maneuverability beyond conventional explanation. Skeptics argued that the pilots had merely mistaken the planet Jupiter for an unidentified craft, and that the simultaneous failures of communications and weapons systems were unrelated coincidences. Yet to many observers, that explanation seemed far too narrow to account for the chain of events described that night, an encounter that, nearly half a century later, still occupies a contested place between military record, historical mystery, and enduring debate. Just after noon, on January 7, 1948, an unusual wave of reports began pouring into Fort Knox, Kentucky. Across the winter sky above western Kentucky, residents in towns such as Madisonville, Owensboro, and Irvington said they had seen a strange white object moving through the air. Witnesses described it as circular and immense, estimated at roughly 250 to 300 feet in diameter. By 1:45 that afternoon, the mystery had reached military observers as well. Officers stationed at the Fort Knox Airport Control Tower spotted the object for themselves. Additional witnesses at two nearby military bases soon confirmed the sighting, though their descriptions gave the object an even more peculiar appearance, portraying it as cone-shaped with a rounded top. At the time of the sighting, 4 Mustang fighter planes from the Kentucky Air National Guard were already airborne, and the control tower quickly directed them to intercept and identify the object. What followed only deepened the mystery. As the fighters drew nearer, the object appeared to rise rapidly, climbing higher into the sky as if deliberately staying beyond reach. Once it passed above 22,500 feet, the formation began to break off. Yet one pilot, Captain Thomas F. Mantell, did not turn back. Continuing upward in pursuit, Mantell pressed on alone, determined to get close enough to understand what he was seeing. Mantell was not an inexperienced pilot drawn into a reckless pursuit. He was a decorated veteran of the Second World War, a respected aviator who had earned both the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal for his service. During the chase, he radioed the tower with a brief but memorable description, reporting that the object appeared metallic and enormous in size. Then, just as suddenly as the pursuit had begun, contact was lost. Later that day, searchers discovered the wreckage of Mantell's aircraft, along with his body, bringing a tragic end to an event that would soon become one of the most discussed and controversial early UFO incidents in American history. In the immediate aftermath, Air Force investigators moved quickly to offer an explanation, arguing that Mantell had climbed too high without sufficient oxygen and blacked out. Over time, other theories emerged. Some officials suggested that what he had chased may have been the planet Venus, though that explanation has long been challenged, since Venus would have been difficult to see in broad daylight and likely obscured by the heavy haze reported in the sky that day. Another possibility raised by later investigators was that Mantell may have been pursuing one of the Navy's secret high-altitude balloon experiments, projects that were still highly classified in 1948. Yet no definitive record has ever surfaced proving that such a test was underway in that exact area at that exact time. Because of that uncertainty, the Mantell incident remains suspended between documented tragedy and unresolved mystery, preserving its place in the early history of modern UFO investigations. By the time the Second World War came to an end, the possibility of life beyond Earth had entered the mainstream imagination of the industrial world with remarkable force. This growing acceptance emerged from several converging developments. Science fiction, which had become an increasingly influential element of popular culture in the early 20th century, accustomed broad audiences to the idea of inhabited worlds, interplanetary travel, and advanced non-human civilizations. At the same time, the extraordinary pace of scientific and technological change gave such ideas a new plausibility. The war itself had demonstrated that discoveries once confined to speculation could, within a few years, alter the structure of everyday life and the balance of global power. If human beings could imagine journeys to other planets in the near future, then it followed, for many, that beings from other worlds might also possess the ability to reach Earth. Yet the widespread expectation of communication with other worlds did not arise from scientific progress and popular literature alone. There were also more unusual and less publicly visible currents shaping the intellectual atmosphere of the late 1940s. In 1946 and early 1947, several prominent American occultists began to predict that a visitation from space was imminent. Among the most notable of these figures was Meade Lane, a significant presence in California's esoteric circles. Lane had been associated with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, one of the most influential occult organizations of the modern era, and he later founded the Borderland Sciences Research Association. Through that organization, he cultivated a network of researchers, mystics, and independent thinkers interested in psychical phenomena, hidden dimensions of nature, and forms of knowledge that stood outside the boundaries of accepted science. The association reflected a broader post-war fascination with the possibility that modern science had not yet explained the full structure of reality, and that contact with other intelligences might come through channels both technological and spiritual. One of Lane's closest associates in this milieu was the spirit medium Mark Probert, through whom a group of purported entities known as the Inner Circle communicated. According to Lane and those around him, these spirits announced in 1946 that unusual aerial craft would soon appear in Earth's skies. Such predictions did not remain isolated claims. Similar warnings and prophecies surfaced in other esoteric circles, and found receptive audiences among people already primed by war, scientific upheaval, and apocalyptic expectation to believe that humanity stood on the threshold of a new age. As a result, some individuals began quite literally to watch the skies, waiting for visible confirmation that contact from beyond Earth was near at hand. In retrospect, this atmosphere of anticipation proved historically significant. When Kenneth Arnold reported his celebrated sighting in 1947, an event often treated as the opening moment of the modern UFO era, many observers interpreted it not as an isolated anomaly, but as the fulfillment of expectations that had already been forming within both popular and occult culture. The emergence of the UFO phenomenon, therefore, cannot be understood solely as a response to a single visual event. It must also be situated within the larger intellectual, spiritual, and cultural environment that had prepared many Americans to believe that visitors from other worlds were not only possible, but imminent.